small catch. And,
all right, welcome to the August 10th meeting of the Issaquah Environmental Board. I'm Jamie Finch and I'll be your chair tonight. Excited for my first in-person. Great to see everyone. Due to the hybrid nature of this meeting, we will have some members, all the board members attending in person, and then we will have some staff that will be virtual either by computer or phone. For all meeting attendees attending remotely, please state your name each time before speaking. If joining remotely, mute your microphone when not speaking. And then for all of the commissioners, as we did last time, or as you did last time, please turn your name card if you have to show your willingness or desire to speak. We will summarize agreement around recommendations at the end of each topic and note if there's any dissent. We'll give everyone a chance to comment on how we summarize. But yeah, I think with that, we can take attendance. So Stacey,
Great, yeah, and I think maybe just Jamie or a couple folks that weren't here before, just a reminder, bathrooms are in the back of the room, emergency exits are out the back doors, and there is a kitchen just around the corner to my left if you need a water refill. All right, Tom Anderson.
Here.
Nathangi Ramathan. Nancy Davidson. Here. Jamie Finch.
here.
Cameron Fisher.
Yeah.
Rishi Hazra has an excused absence. Dan Hintz.
Here.
Laura Levenko. Ashwin Manoharan. Don McWilliams.
Here.
Ann Newcomb. Here. And Janet Wall.
here,
All right, thank you, Stacey. Next up, I believe we have minutes. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes from the last meeting? Being none, the minutes from the last meeting are unanimously approved. And then after that, we'll have public comment. I do think we have at least one member of the public that's interested in speaking. Do we have anyone else attending remotely or that's indicated they want to speak?
No, we just have Connie attending that's indicated interest to speak, and we didn't receive any written comments.
Great. Well, public comments are an important part of the public process. We take them seriously and factor them into the decisions we make. When recognized, please unmute your microphone, state your name, address, and relationship to the city. Speak clearly and pause frequently, and please limit comments to 5 minutes. All right, I think we can go to Connie now.
All right, Connie, you should be unmuted. Go ahead.
Yep, I see that. Hi, I'm Connie Marsh. I live up on Squawk. So I was reading through your threats type of agenda, and I'm more of a fan of how do we keep it from happening at all, but here we go. That's not the topic. So there's one that I did not see, and that was food. As we've seen supply issues with the pandemic, I think we are likely to see food supply issues as we have climate changes, as we stop being able to get so much. And of course, the solutions are that we need to create potentially local, reliable sources here. And I have an example. I believe it's Grants Pass. All the restaurants got together and decided that they would cooperatively purchase their produce from their local farms. And so they basically created a financially supported local agriculture market that they used so that they basically didn't have to truck their food from everywhere. So I think that there's opportunities to help create food redundancy, and also to I think we need to address the concept that we may not always have the same access, especially to fresh produce, as we have now. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. And I believe that is all of our public comment. You may just want to note for the record that Ashwin has joined. you. Good to see you, Ashwin. Next up, we have our main agenda items. I believe the first one is our comprehensive emergency management plan, presented by Lee Shin, emergency manager. So feel free to take it away. Lee, one thing that would be great as you get into your presentation is just how you'd like to handle questions, whether you want those as we go or at the end of your presentation.
Yeah, I think at the end would be great.
Sounds good.
All right, Lee, you should be able to present your screen now.
Okay.
Look for the share button.
Yeah. All right, can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
All right, well, appreciate you guys having me. My name is Lee Shen. I'm the emergency manager for the city of Issaquah, and really appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk to you guys. A lot of what I do really correlates very well with what Stacy is doing, and I got a question just recently about what do you think the changes are in emergency management, and really at the top of that list was really climate change. And so I'll talk a little bit more about climate change as we kind of go through this presentation, but I'll kind of lead into that topic, but I'll also talk about what we do from a emergency management point of view. And so as the emergency manager for the city of Issaquah, my mission is to prepare for disasters and emergencies by conducting drills and exercises. And so that could be internally and externally. We just had a Cascadia Rising scenario on June 14th, 2022, a 9.0 earthquake, and we conducted that exercise with internal and external partners, maintaining emergency plans. I'll be talking specifically tonight about our comprehensive emergency management plan, coordinating with internal and external partners. That's a really big part of what I do. Public and private sector partners, Costco, partnered with Costco recently on vaccination sites, on booster sites, Swedish Issaquah School District. And really, when you look at an emergency management program, really the cusp of emergency management programs across the nation really is educating residents in preparedness. We do that with a program called CERT, Community Emergency Response Team. We have the city of Issaquah broken up into 14 zones. We have CERT members that live across those 14 zones, and we just recently practiced with our CERT team. They were part of our full-scale exercise with an earthquake scenario. We also have trainings with CERT. They do trainings twice a year, and really we're always looking to add additional residents from the city of Issaquah. We're always looking to build our program. We have a pretty active program. Our numbers range anywhere between, we have on paper a couple hundred, but really those who are active, maybe in the low teens. So maybe like 18, 19 that are very active. And then we have 100 on paper, maybe 200 that are listed, but we're always looking to really bring on people who are really active. That's really the key. I come from California, and I came from the Bay Area, and we had very large programs, but not necessarily programs that were active. So who are our partners? And so we really look to partner with everyone in our community. If you look at FEMA and what their model is, it really is whole community when it comes to their guidance on plannings. And so we go into the neighborhoods, people in neighborhoods. We just recently, we were part of National Night Out on August the 2nd. We were part of the Chalk Art Festival recently, where we were out passing out brochures and information on emergency management. Community groups, businesses. We have an economic development coordinator that I closely aligned with. And so we really look to align closely with our businesses within the city of Issaquah. Faith-based, churches, nonprofits, we're always looking at partnerships. We recently had a weather event, extreme weather, and one of our churches stepped up and said, hey, we can be a shelter if you need us to be. Local hospitals, The schools are obviously a very big one. And then ultimately internally, we work really closely with our internal city departments, IT, Parks and Community Services, HR, police, public works, sustainability, really across the board. That's really the cusp of what we do. A lot of time throughout my career, people have asked, what is emergency management? What does an emergency manager do? And it's really just that whole community coordination. And so from an emergency management standpoint, we do a lot of planning. We write a lot of plans. We keep a lot of our plans updated with annexes. And really, if you look at the comprehensive emergency management plan, if you look just 5 years ago, when I did an evaluation of some local jurisdictions, their public health plans were really out of date. A lot of them had information that wasn't up to date. It wasn't clear. The pandemic hit us, right? And so I would say a lot of jurisdictions, a lot of cities, a lot of municipalities, a lot of institutions of higher ed just weren't ready for COVID-19. And so really we look at the things that, okay, earthquake is obviously always a big one, wildland fires, tsunamis, things of that nature. But really it's that man-made, non-man-made risk that can actually catch you by surprise and the ones you're not ready for. And so you look at this list, these are all the different types of planning we do. We look at debris management, we look to find debris management contracts. Continuity of operations is a big one. How do we operate when things go down? We just this past June, when we had that large full-scale exercise, a large piece of that was actually ham radio, amateur radio. What are we going to do when regular connectivity, cell phone coverage goes down? And so these are the things that keep us emergency managers up at night. Hazard mitigation plan, really looking at those risks, what those risks are throughout not only the city, but also at a county level, training and exercise, and then an extreme weather plan, really looking at what are our triggers, what are our thresholds for opening things like cooling centers, warming centers. We just, in the recent heat wave in Issaquah, we did open a cooling center for 1 week. So what is the CEMP? It's the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan, and it's used not only by the city of Issaquah officials, but also our external partners. And so this document is a guidance document. We call it our Bible. Really, it has all the information that we need as emergency personnel, emergency first responders, before, during, and after a disaster. It is our official plan for providing emergency management services for the city of Issaquah. And also it assists our neighboring assisting agencies, public and private, our business partners, in determining response plans by the city and what our expectations are from those whole community partners. So everyone really has a stake when it comes to something large within city of Issaquah. So it's also, I mentioned earlier slide, it's an educational and management tool. It can increase the ability to deliver timely and efficient emergency and disaster services to the citizens of Issaquah. And when you really look at how you plan, it can save one more life, it can save 10 more lives, it can save 100,000 more lives. And really that's what better planning does. So what is the purpose? It allows us to establish command and control during a disaster, really allows us to determine who's in charge of what we need to do. It also allows us to designate those disaster-related functions, things like debris management or things like going out into the field and determining what the damage, what the extent is. We have platforms that we use from an emergency management standpoint. We use our Teams, we use our SharePoint. Now we can actually, during a real event, during the East Fork flooding in early January of this year, we were actually able to take people out into the field and they were able to take pictures real time, send them to us in the EOC when we were activated, so we could kind of make our next steps on what we need to do. Really identifying those resources to utilize. What resources do we have? What personnel do we have? What equipment do we have? In the recent snow event, there was a lack of salt, not only within Issaquah, but across the whole metro area of Seattle. And every jurisdiction had salt shortages. And so nobody was really prepared. There was salt available, but it was available as far as Spokane. And the vendors in Spokane actually wanted us to drive there to go get it. And so obviously that wasn't a great option for us. And so really identifying what we need to do, other sources of manpower, and then that coordination. A lot of what we do is coordination between not only interagency but external agencies, King County Emergency Management, King County Department of Public Health, our state emergency management department, and also our neighboring cities. We really collaborate closely with our neighboring cities. Just this recent heat wave, I collaborated closely with City of Kirkland, City of Bellevue, just to see what they were doing in terms of opening a cooling center and what their numbers were. And so I'll talk a little bit more about those numbers here in later slides. And then organizing volunteers. Volunteers is a really big part of what we do. Really in something large, it's going to be those volunteers in the community. It's going to allow us to be resilient and really respond to that. And like I told you earlier, we have City of Issaquah broken up into 14 different zones. So what are the authorities of the CEMP? The City of Issaquah Municipal Code, Chapter 2.62, Federal Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act, the Community Planning and Community Right to Know, the King County CEMP, and the RCW, the Revised Code of Washington, 38.52 Emergency Management, that says that as a jurisdiction, you are required to update your comprehensive emergency management plan every 5 years. So what are the key concepts within this plan? Well, all these disaster operations that are written within the plan, they'll be coordinated with our King County Office of Emergency Management. They play a really close role in what we do. A lot of our plans that we write, they review as well. And so really, ultimately, when local resources have been exhausted or overwhelmed, the mayor or designee may request state and or federal resources. And so that hasn't happened within Issaquah in quite some time, right? And so we haven't had anything catastrophic. People have brought up the Nisqually earthquake as one of the bigger ones that they've seen, but we just don't see these large incidents that often. You know, me coming from California, just having seen a lot of the really large catastrophic events, the Napa earthquake, Camp Fire, some of the larger fires as well, it can be pretty overwhelming pretty quickly. And so I've seen a lot of scenarios where local cities and jurisdictions have had to call in state and federal resources. So as part of the Revised Code of Washington 38.56, resources may be shared among all Washington cities and counties. And so that means we collaborate really closely. In one of these recent weather events, North Bend, the city of North Bend asked us for some resources, and we sent them some resources during the snow event, some extra snow plows, things of that nature. All city departments are designated the responsibility for providing personnel and equipment in support of a disaster preparedness, mitigation and response, and recovery as directed by the mayor. So let's talk a little bit about that climate change impact. And, you know, like I had mentioned earlier, I was talking to a fellow colleague and they were like, what do you see as the big changes in emergency management? And really, I think everyone has had to look at climate change impact, not only from a state of Washington impact, but also on a West Coast, and then nationally, everyone is looking at what this extreme weather is doing to our planning for emergency management. So these challenges are quite frequent. Things like the heavier precipitation, the heat waves, the drought, extreme flooding, the higher sea levels can alter the magnitudes of these hazards. I mean, just look right here in Issaquah and look at the extreme nature of how cold it gets and then how deep that cold stays throughout the winter and then the summers. I mean, I understand last year that there was 115, here in the east side, which is pretty unprecedented. I mean, it got up to about 96 in the recent heat wave as well. And so really we're tackled and faced with a lot of these things happening. This fire just burning down in SoCal, big letter CNN. This thing is a direct result of climate change. So like I had mentioned earlier, rising temperatures, increased storm intensity and frequency, lots of drought, lots of fire risk, lots of fuels, and really shifting threats to human health and disease patterns. This is really impacting everything. And really the vulnerable populations are really those populations that are even more at risk when it comes to weather extremes both ways, when it comes to these extreme temperatures that lead to things like more extreme weather events, flooding, snow events. And so just from a city of Issaquah point of view, these are just some of the recent weather events. We just had the recent heat wave here in July of 2022. We had that extreme rain, the flooding on Veterans Day 2021. We had the extreme cold that was in the latter December 2021 as well. And then we had that snow event right around Christmas of 2021. And then the East Fork floods, January 6th and 7th, which really put a pretty big impact on the city and really the community, the neighborhoods as well. So the last 2 years, the city of Issaquah has provided cooling centers, accessibility for residents. And so we've opened up a cooling center both times. We've also been in coordination with our local libraries to discuss extended hours in the library when these extreme weather events happen, and they are amenable to working with us to provide that option as well. Sorry about that. And then warming centers. We opened a warming center recently, and they were opened in recent extreme weather events. We had our warming center opened up for a week as well. Okay, this is not moving. Okay. So emergency shelters, that would be a more extreme case, become a forefront issue on the east side and in Seattle with these recent weather events, especially not only this year, but last year, and also nationally, really providing these emergency shelters in partnership with the American Red Cross, providing for shelters for those forced to evacuate, and then providing those resources such as mental health professionals, food and water. I'll talk a little bit about our East Fork flooding event in January of 2022. So on the East Fork flooding, Issaquah reached phase 2 flood levels, and homes along the East Fork of Issaquah were flooded with water sweeping through the front doors and into crawl spaces. Throughout this event, no community members needed evacuation, but from an emergency management standpoint, we were prepared to evacuate community members if needed. We had some hotels ready, 10 hotel rooms, and also we were ready to provide sheltering if needed for anyone that needed this as a result of the evacuation. So flooding is one of the bigger problems in Issaquah the last few decades, and especially the last few years. So significant flooding has occurred on Issaquah Creek. And this particular event that we had was interesting because the significant flooding that we saw was seen along Dogwood Street and Front Street North. And so some of the resources that we used as a emergency management point of view, we posted flood information on a lot of these different mechanisms you see, the radio station, TV station, social media, city website. It really is about alert and warning to your community. I think every jurisdiction, every city has different strategies when it comes to how they get their information to their residents, because every resident has a different way by which they receive information. Just like everyone has a different mechanism by which they communicate. Some people use text, some people use cell phone, some people use chat. And so I think as emergency managers, one of our bigger challenges is how do we get information to our residents when a big fire hits, when a big earthquake hits, when there's an extreme weather event. I think there's a big challenge with that. I've seen situations where there were senior citizens, there was a issue with the water, and it was a water crisis for a whole week. There was packaged water and bulk water delivered the whole week. And we had a large portion of our senior citizen community that never actually got the information. And it was kind of interesting because we delivered some of that water and they were like, "Oh, what's this for?" And we said, "Hey, it's for the water crisis." And they're like, "Oh, we didn't even know about it." So I think that's one of our bigger challenges moving forward. So a lot of our strengths and weaknesses in the response to a flood, we really look at what we can do better from an emergency response standpoint. We do an after action improvement plan, and that looks at the things that we can do, whether it's in our SOPs, whether it's in our alert and warning, sandbags provided to the residents. We really look at what we can do to make things better the next time around. And then we look at training. We look at training and exercise as really the backbone of everything we do. If you look at jurisdictions across the nation, in the state of Washington, in California, all along the West Coast, really, if you look at the limitations of what comes out of a lot of these events, it's always training, lack of training, more training. And so training and exercise, initial and annual training programs for city employees who could eventually serve in emergency operations center positions, and then recruiting more city employees to staff the EOC for long and short-term disasters. And so we're looking for a lot of different skills. We're looking at EMT and paramedics, sign language interpreters, bilingual, search and rescue skills. So who is our team? Our team, we have an intern, we have an incident management team that's made up from people within the city, as well as our partner agency, Eastside Fire and Rescue. We have people as part of our incident management team from all over the city: public works, police, fire, human resources, the whole bit. We also partner really closely with King County Emergency Management, State of Washington Emergency Management Department, American Red Cross, Eastside Fire and Rescue Emergency Manager. They're a big part of our team as well. But really, the success of our program is really contingent upon those relationships we have with everyone else that are part of this team. And that's all I have. So I'll leave it for questions. I'm not sure where I'm at. I see it's 7 o'clock, so feel free. My cell phone here and email as well. I'm sure Stacy will provide email, but yeah, I'm open to questions, and fire away, please.
Thank you, Lee. We will go straight into questions. The first I saw was Anne. Do you want to question?
Oh, thank you so much. I feel so good knowing you guys are out there. Just a couple questions. Do you use drones? Do you have drones rather than helicopters to fly around and check on people in homes?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we have drones, and we're looking to build more on our drone program. We're looking to buy more. We just recently had our budget analysis, and one of the items on my list is to get extra drones. And so our police department as well is really looking to bolster their drone program. Now, there's one limitation with drones, is you have to have the licensed people who can operate them. And so we're looking also to bolster the people that can operate those as well.
Nice. I just have one other question. Do you encourage neighbors to check on each other in emergencies rather than feeling like you need to do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I know in the previous years, the emergency management coordinator looked into building community block zones. And so what that is it's identifying your block and having those neighbors check on each other. So the program started maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and we're looking to build more upon that. But yeah, I think it's a great idea to do, really identifying who on your neighbor has even special skills. I've seen situation in Oakland where they had their whole street identified, everyone's cell phone, who the nurses were, who the doctors were, and it was distributed among all the people in that neighborhood block. I think it's a great idea. I don't think it's extensive here in Issaquah, but I think it's something that if we start doing, it can be a big benefit for sure.
Cool, thank you.
Cameron, next.
Oh, great. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Lee. Can you just tell me a little bit about how Puget Sound Energy works with the regional municipalities?
Yeah, so we have a representative from Puget Sound Energy that we coordinate with when it comes to power outages and things of that nature. And so they are part of our operational team, and we work and coordinate with them closely. Now, sometimes we do have issues with getting information from them in a timely manner. And so that can be a limitation. And that's pretty typical for utilities working with emergency management partners, not only in Washington, but across the nation, is typically that time frame by which they get the municipalities that information they need can sometimes be lagged. And so we have a relationship with them. We have a point of contact for them. And when we are activated within our emergency operations center, we do communicate with them.
Thank you.
Tom?
Oh, yes, thank you. Tom Anderson here. I was intrigued by your comment about ham radio involvement in the recent emergency simulation. I'd like to hear a little bit more about how that factors into the plan here. I guess I kind of feel like climate change, okay, this is a sea change for humans on planet Earth to cope with. There's another sea change that's been going on in our generation, and that is our ever increasing dependence on these wonderful little devices in our pocket. And oh my God, what are we going to do when they fail us, as they will someday? So having in place infrastructure, amateur radio-based infrastructure for reporting issues, is the city plugged into that? I mean, what would I do if I wanted to report something by ham radio? I'm not aware of what the plan would be, and if there is something in the plan, I'd like to hear about it. What can you tell us?
Yeah, we're plugged in. That's a great question. We're very plugged in with our ham radio and amateur radio group. We have a team called the Issaquah Communications Support Team, and they were a large part of our exercise on June 14th, 2022. And they are a group of volunteers, and we have a pretty engaged group. They were in our EOC in the exercise. They were coordinating with the people, our volunteers in the field. We also have a satellite trailer with ham radio capability that sits in our public works lot as part of our EOC. Before the June 14th exercise, we had 2 large-scale exercises for ham radio and ICAST, and they are a very active group. And really a large piece of our exercise on June 14th was to test our ability to operate when cell coverage and internet went down. Really, that's the limiting factor. If we're able to communicate quickly via ham radio and VHF, 800 VHF, satellite capability, we're always looking from a city of Issaquah point of view to increase our emergency network connectivity capability. So feel free to reach out to me offline, and I can connect you into our ICAST team. I think you'd really get a good handle on what we're doing from a city of Issaquah, but also working with our community partners. But it's a very big part of how we feel like we're going to respond. And it's a really big priority from the city administrator and mayor point of view as well, just to give you a little background on that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I would like to follow up with you on that later.
No problem.
Thank you, Tom. Jamie Finch, speaking of, a couple of questions for you, Lee. One, you mentioned that the CMP gets updated every 5 years. Where are we at in that cycle?
Yeah, so I just submitted the CMP for this 5-year cycle just last week. And so once the state emergency management department sends it back to me, they're going to give recommendations. It'll go to our city council for approval. And so we're looking at approximately a mid-November completion date. I can certainly send a copy of that to Stacy and this group, but that's the requirement that the state of Washington has every 5 years. Now, I came from California, and we update our plans a little bit more regularly. We didn't update them every year, every 2 years. I was part of Institute of Higher Education. We actually updated it every year. Now, just because we're submitting it this year doesn't mean I'm not going to touch it until 2027. So I'll submit it this year, 2022. I'll get the approval, but I'll still continuously update that plan throughout the next 5 years. And so as we get things that happen, as we improve things, as we integrate new things into our plan, those are immediately integrated, but just the formal process is every 5 years. And it's the same formal process for the city of Bellevue, city of Kirkland. It's no different for every jurisdiction. So that's the state of Washington requirement under the RCW.
And whether it's related to this specific submittal or just kind of what you're seeing and where you expect it to kind of evolve, like at 40,000 feet, like where is it changing? Like what are the things that, I mean, I think particularly with a lens on climate change and some of the weather events that you're talking about, but like what are those top 3 items that you're seeing being more of a focus or changes that are necessary?
Yeah, sheltering is a big one. I was just thinking about this today. Like 5 years ago, nobody was thinking of pets. Pets has become a really big forefront issue with sheltering. Our homeless problem has become very realistic on the West Coast the last 2 to 3 years, and I've seen a really big shift in how emergency managers are really attacking sheltering. And so that's really tied into the warming and cooling centers as well. And so I would just to give you an idea, the last time this was updated, we really didn't have much information on that, on sheltering, on cooling centers, on warming centers, what our evacuation capacity is, what our ADA capacity is. So that's one. The second one is climate change, really looking at how weather affects what we do. So we're going to be writing out an evacuation plan for wildland fire. We're going to be doing it in conjunction with Eastside Fire and Rescue. They're going to be hiring a wildland fire preparedness coordinator, but that was nothing. There was nothing in our plans when it came to wildland fire. There was stuff for evacuation, but not wildland fire specific, and it's become a really big forefront issue at the county level. We've done a lot with outreach, coordination, events. Just had one recently with our partners at King County Resilience. The third one would be really communication and technology, the integration of technology into how we do things on a regular basis. Just the last few years, the city of Issaquah, we've really integrated and included the use of technology into how we do emergency management, how we use technology to provide alert and warning. And really, I'd say those 3 things are a big forefront issue for emergency management programs across the nation. They really have become, I would say, the top 3. So if you look at my old plan, 2016, 2017, the last time it was updated, you'll see a little bit less of all that stuff. And this new update, you'll see a lot more of that in our overall approach to emergency management.
Thank you, Lee. Just one final question, and kind of going off of what Cameron had asked about. I'm curious where you see, in particular, the electric grid fitting in as more and more things electrify. That's a critical part of climate action plan for the city, as well as just generally cleaning up and reducing carbon emissions. So curious, one, where you see that fitting in. 2, how you see engagement with Puget Sound Energy and other kind of stakeholders in ensuring that the grid is as robust and reacts as quickly as possible when there are issues.
Yeah, it's going to be a big one. Power outages, we've seen just recently, more and more power outages happening, and you're right. The stability of that grid is going to be a big part of what we do. We we're bringing on a new public works director here in the next few months, and I think looking at that as part of our emergency management planning is going to be a big area and a future area that we need to bolster and make more robust. Yes.
Great, thank you, Lee. All right, Nancy, we will go to you next.
Hi, Lee. I have a couple of questions for you and comments. What I haven't heard you talk about is how you're dealing with fuel. If you have an extended event, you know, city vehicles will likely need fuel to get around. People that are trying to bring food into the area will need fuel. Are you working on an element to address gasoline, particularly to get things moving back in the area?
So from an internal perspective or just overall, like just gasoline?
Overall, I mean, people, you know, during an event, you need to be able to move. You know, if it's a snow event, you have to have snow removal equipment. If it's a, you know, all of those things usually require, that heavy equipment usually requires fuel, gasoline. Sometimes you can't get that necessarily if it's a big event. So have you given some thought into how to deal with gasoline?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually did that in California, but we just had a fleet study done by an independent contractor looking at all our vehicles, the type of gasoline it uses, and really critical transportation is going to be a big piece of what we do, and what type of fuel that we're going to use and how we're going to get it. I think it's very relevant because the city of Issaquah has not had a big event. Not necessarily a forefront issue, but I think it's certainly something to consider. Right now, we're looking really closely at generators and really looking at what the outage, the loads, what our backup powers are for our critical facilities for just the city of Issaquah. But what you're mentioning is definitely something that's on the radar. We just have some work to do in that area.
And my suggestion to you is take an inventory of fuel storage that you have locally.
Okay.
Particularly beside fire and rescue, you know, you have that heavy equipment that will clearly be used. And and at least get an idea what you might have available, and then at some point have some kind of plan about how to allocate it in case there is a major event, because you know, I don't need to drive in a major event, but I think that emergency people do. So, but just a thought. I mean, but I don't think that I've seen a lot of jurisdictions do an inventory of what gas stations have, how much what they try and keep on hand on a day-to-day basis, you know, and Costco and all those other, just a thought.
Oh no, it's a great one. And in the Bay Area, I did that specifically. I looked at the types of fuel used on a monthly basis, really looking at that load, who is using it, and what quantities we had on hand. And then I also looked at the different options: fuel, regular gasoline, diesel, and then electric. I think it's a very important piece to look at.
Right, I mean, it's something that the city could kind of harness if it needed to
Yeah.
set it aside for an emergency operation. And I encourage you to also to consider Connie's comment about food. It's a similar type situation, at least to give some thought to it. And I guess my last comment to you is on communications. And I tend to stay pretty informed on what's happening in the city. I've joined all their little email lists that they get out stuff, but my neighbors haven't a clue what's going on in the city. And I think it's really important, if there's something like this, that we find a different way to get people to sign up for some of these lists or to get some communication. You know, the old postcards in the mailbox often will get to people or neighbors going door to door. But to continue to assume that your communication by just blasting out something on an email that comes through on an email, which is how I get most of my city communications, I would say 90% of my neighbors have no clue. And so, you know, if you're trying to say, you know, at least sign up for our emergency notification things with your cell phone, sending out a postcard to let citizens know about that or something so that they sign up or get some way. Because in my opinion, you're not going to reach most of us, and we're going to be standing there trying to figure out what the heck to do. And just putting it out on the email blast the mayor sends out, or the city insider, or all these other ones that come out, there's not getting to a lot of the people in the community.
That's a that's a great observation, and it's something that as emergency managers we're always working to become better at, and by providing all those different methods. So we are upgrading our AM 1700 radio this year, and so we don't know how many people are actually tuning into that. Like you're saying, there's a lot of people that might not know what's going on, right? We're strong on social media. We update our website regularly. We update our AM 1700 radio. We do have a lot of mechanisms, but like you said, it still might not be enough. If you look at some cities, if you look at the city of Berkeley, for example, they use sirens, like literally they have a siren system because their square footage is very small in terms of their footprint on their actual square miles, right? So it's actually doable. When you look at Issaquah, we're actually pretty spread out. As part of my wildland fire planning, I did a full corner to corner drive of the whole city of Issaquah, and it's actually quite big. We looked at some of the emergency private access roads. We looked at some of the areas, around the more, Squawk and those areas, and it's big. It's a large square footage, and really the ingress and egress is really one and done. There's not many routes in and out, and so, I'd love to brainstorm more and hear more, more ideas, and working with our communications team to see how we can provide that alert and warning to reach a larger, broader audience.
I think that's going to be important to be successful in the community. That's just my 2 cents. And
Yep.
I don't think our current mechanisms are doing it. I wasn't even aware of the radio that you just talked about, and I've been in the city a while. So, I mean, I think it's important to try and tell people what's out there.
Exactly.
That's it for me.
Thanks, Nancy. Ann?
Yeah. So I would love to see us looking at more distributed energy and batteries, even F-150s for emergencies and hot and cold situations. So if we have an F-150, and I'm sure there'll be more electric vehicles coming on like that, that powers a house up from 3 to 10 days, depending on how much electricity you're, how much you're conserving. So those could be handy, and then you could just drive it someplace else. Maybe there's someplace else that has electricity and you can charge it. Rather than generators that are using fossil fuels, I would love to see solar powering battery packs. And since we might have a lot more heat, maybe you could have the battery packs in a cool area, like in a basement or something underground. Just some things to think about. Thank you. Are you already thinking about that?
Yeah, we're thinking about that, but we need more work in that area, but I think it's a great suggestion.
I kind of like the vehicle idea, the trucks, because then if somebody else has electricity, you can just drive, get it refueled, and come back. And of course,
Yeah, we're still a little bit of ways. We're going to get that fleet study back from our independent consultant here, and I think a lot of what they provide will give us some good information as well. But your suggestion, certainly I'll put in my notes as something to continue.
thanks.
Thank you, Ann. I think with that, those are all of our questions on this topic. So just to summarize, several board members were interested just in the communication with the community during the crisis, whether via ham radio or, in Nancy's case, kind of the preemptive. How are we making sure that as many people are looped in on communications around disasters? There was interest in how to respond with increasing electrification. So what are methods to ensure quick responses and basically robust grid? Understanding fuel storage and allocation, and a few other items related to drones as a tool for disaster recovery. But I think just looking at some of those, so some of the different, not only the changes in climate change, but also some of our reactions to climate change. How do we make sure that things like increasing electrification are factored into how we respond and think about disasters? So thank you, Lee.
No, thank you. Thank you for all the suggestions as well.
right. Well, I guess first I should ask, does anyone have any objections to my summary? All right, I think with that, we can close this agenda item out. And our next agenda item, our climate vulnerability assessment, which I think Stacy, you'll be presenting, so feel free to take it away.
Great. All right. Thank you, Lee. You're welcome to stand if you want, or I believe you're calling in from vacation, so feel free to step. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. See if I can navigate through the screens here. Great. Well, thanks very much. So we wanted to present to you tonight the emergency management plan along with the climate vulnerability assessment, because we saw a lot of connection between the two, and really understanding our vulnerabilities, preparing ourselves to adapt and build resilience, and then being able to respond when an event occurs. So I am working very closely with Lee's team on our climate vulnerability assessment, along with our human services team, to really enhance the work that the city is doing. Okay. So this project is underway. We're tonight really seeking your input on a couple of the key components that are coming up quickly. Those include the sectors, which is how we're going to assess our impacts and classify our vulnerabilities and actions, as well as the draft public engagement plan. Tonight, I'll just walk through a quick overview of the project. We'll talk about what is a vulnerability assessment and how will it be done, take a quick snapshot of the climate impacts, which you just heard a lot about. And then we'll dig into each of the sectors and then seek your feedback on any revisions that you would recommend for those. And then we'll talk about next steps. So as you are aware, the ICAP spoke to both climate mitigation, which is addressing the causes of climate change, as well as actions to reduce our impact. And then it also spoke to adaptation, which is addressing the impacts that we are already experiencing from climate change or will experience. The ICAP called upon the city to conduct a more in-depth climate vulnerability assessment in order to better understand where and who in the city was most likely to feel impacts from climate change, and what the city could do and the community could do to address those impacts. The climate vulnerability assessment really recognizes climate change here, and we need to do what we can to prevent further change, but we also need to live to learn with the impacts of climate change. So this includes both the adaptation piece, taking the steps to live with the effects of climate change, and the resilience piece, which is ensuring that our key economic and social systems are climate proofed for the future or can withstand some of those changes. The vulnerability assessment will really dig into an understanding of the impacts, where and who they're most likely to affect, what steps we can do to adapt and build resilience. And then we will also develop a number of communication tools for communities at high risk. So thinking about the suggestions you were providing, Nancy, for maybe some mailings so people can sign up for emergency notifications. As mentioned, we're doing this project in coordination with emergency management and human services. And really our goal is to come out with what I'm calling actionable actions, things that we can actually do, put policies and plans in place, take specific actions out on the ground, and see them implemented, as well as those communication tools that I mentioned. So as mentioned, this project was included within the ICAP. It provided a pretty high-level general overview of the anticipated climate impacts that we would experience regionally. It also has a dedicated resilience and well-being section that was really designed to increase our community's ability to adapt to those unavoidable impacts of climate change. The climate vulnerability assessment is going to complete several of the early actions in the ICAP as part of this focus area. This includes protecting the community from severe climate impacts, assessing the vulnerability within the community, and ultimately also developing those emergency response systems and incentivizing adaptation upgrades. I think another important part of this program or this project is that we are really working to engage other members of the community that may not have been involved in conversations around climate change in the past, and ensuring that the products coming out of this project are really focused on those most likely to be impacted. This is a snapshot of the climate vulnerability assessment timeline. Originally, we were planning this to be a very short project, a 3 to 5 month project, to try and get some information to Lee's team to incorporate in the emergency plan, which we are doing to some extent. But we also just received a grant from Department of Commerce that is going to allow us to greatly expand this project. We are going to do much more extensive community engagement, that I'll talk about in a few minutes. And then also to expand our communication tools or the actual products that come out and get into the hands of the community. The grant also will provide us some support to take the results of the vulnerability assessment and integrate it into the comprehensive plan update. So right now we are really focused on the first pieces of the assessment, including that vulnerability analysis, and then preparing for engagement. And those are the 2 areas we'll focus on tonight. We just heard a lot of examples from Lee. Yeah.
I don't know if you want questions.
Yes, feel free to jump in with questions.
So do you have a consultant helping you, or are you leading this effort on your own?
Yeah, we actually brought on Cascadia Consulting Group through an RFP process. As you are familiar with them, they also developed the ICAP. So yes, so they have great background with the city of Issaquah with our climate action plan, and then they have done vulnerability assessments for communities throughout the Northwest and the country. Thank you, I forgot to mention that. And they actually put this presentation together, which is why it looks a little different than our standard city presentations also. So we just heard from Lee a lot of information about recent events that we are starting to see in our community. These are the types of things that we'll be evaluating further in the vulnerability assessment. So the vulnerability will tell us how much a community or a function of our system is at risk for climate change impacts. There's generally 3 things that are looked at when doing a vulnerability assessment: how much we're exposed to the harm of that climate impact, the degree to which we are exposed, and then what is our ability to be able to adapt. That can help to decrease our vulnerability or show where we might be most at risk. The steps that the consultant will work through for the vulnerability assessment is first to characterize those anticipated climate impacts. They look at current science, existing conditions, understand community perspectives. So we've started to do some engagement with the community to hear from them about what climate impacts they're concerned about. They'll then look at the sectors where we want to identify climate vulnerabilities. That will also later on inform our actions. That's where we'll be digging in a little bit more tonight. From the sectors identified, they then will gather as much information they can about existing plans, projects, work the city's doing, knowledge from the community, staff experts, pulling in from reports and different research so they can really look at our exposure to impacts, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. They'll then assign a scale to all of that information so that they can look at where we might have higher vulnerabilities or more resilience in the city. So this is the part where we're seeking some feedback tonight from the board. This is the current breakdown of the sectors that have been identified. This is your early snapshot. I'll walk through each of these in a little bit more, and then we'll come back to this slide to discuss some of the questions. These sectors were organized first by the consulting team, and then they brought them to a workshop with city staff. And then did some reorganization, and we're bringing them to you tonight for any additional feedback, gaps, revisions that you might know. So I will go through each of these, and then we'll have discussion at the end with some specific questions. So the first sector is the built environment. This looks at climate impacts to buildings, housing, transportation. It can look at electricity demand, whether there's critical facilities, floods and landslides that impact the various built environments. Can look at extreme heat and the impacts on asphalt and pavement, impacts of wildfires on buildings or critical infrastructure. So pretty large category. Our next one is water resources and sewers. So this looks at our water supply, septic, and sewer systems. Mostly will probably take into effect changes in rainfall patterns, snowfall, and water availability, as well as water quality. Next one is our natural systems and stormwater. Again, this is a very large sector that looks at open space, parks, tree canopy, ecosystems, and then also through feedback from staff, we've pulled in here the stormwater infrastructure. This will mostly take into consideration changing temperatures and precipitation, the impacts that has on our ecosystem, as well as the health of our natural areas. The next sector is physical health and safety. So this looks at impacts and actions for physical and mental health, air quality, emergency services. Some of the examples here might be looking at the impacts of climate change to outdoor workers, those experiencing houselessness, ones that might be more vulnerable to extreme weather events. And then our last category, I believe, is community and economic well-being. This is looking at social services, our local businesses, and then how our local economy is connected to the regional economy as well as grow. So this could be a range of different items included in this sector, things that might even include looking at the regional supply chain and opportunities for green economies, looking at how our local economy could change, such as with changing temperatures. Might we become more of a wine growing region, but then how would more extreme weather, wildfire, smoke impact that economy? So quite a range of items also included in this sector. So that was a quick snapshot of the sectors. This is a little small on this screen, but it was included in your packet. What I did with this slide, though, is I put the questions up as well. That's the one difference from the slide in your packet. But we have those different sectors: the built environment, community economic well-being, water resources, sewer, natural systems, stormwater, public health, safety. And then on the other side are the questions where we're looking for feedback. So really looking tonight to hear from the board whether anything's missing. We talked a little bit earlier about food security. That's one I'll definitely make note of. But are there any other major sectors missing or subsectors within those that we should be considering, both in terms of climate impacts as well as actions we might take to build resiliency? And then if we have time, we can dig into other questions around, are there any priorities that jump out to you? Anything specific we should keep in mind as we start looking into these further? And then again, if we have time, questions around key elements, assets, neighborhoods we should thinking about that might feel impacts of climate change more, or attributes that might help us. So a lot we can dig into here if we have time, but really wanted to focus on those missing sectors or priorities first.
Stacey, do you want us to take all three at once or work our way one by one through?
Why don't we start first with what's missing? That would be great, because that's really, we want to make sure that we're not leaving anything out that we want to have included in the vulnerability assessment.
Don?
So the first one that jumps right out at me, and I know it's built into each section, but I think you need to call out fiscal planning, long range fiscal planning. Because it's gonna cost a lot of money to try to pull off some of these, so you have to think, 50 years into the future.
Thank you. And I can go back to the larger slides with the details of each of those if this is very small on the screen. Other items missing?
Stacy, one thing, Jamie speaking. One thing that I'm curious about, because there's two different ways you could organize this. Like you guys have chosen to organize it by kind of categories of impact.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I think will probably come out in whatever is created, but is not necessarily represented here is for a given type of, so take more extreme or more intense winter storms. How does that cut across all of these different categories? Because I actually think in some ways that will be easier for the community to understand. That'll probably be easier for us to understand. I don't necessarily think we need to change the whole organization, but that's ultimately, we know, well, science will tell us how much more frequent those types of events will be, how much more intense they will be, and they'll help dictate, okay, these are the impacts of that type of event. And so this is how we could plan looking at it from that perspective. So I think that would be another, that would be a wholesale change to how you look at it. But I do think if it's not the overarching kind of organization, I would really encourage that to be, I could see a table or something to that effect that helps us understand how a given phenomena cuts across these categories. The one thing, and I think I know the answer, but I'd just be curious to expand and hear the city's perspective on stormwater where it is. We'd love to hear a little more about that.
Sure, yeah, and great suggestion with that categorization by event type or weather event. I think that's definitely something that could be built in, like you said, as a table, but then also as we think about our communication materials, if we're developing two-pagers or communication to certain communities in the city, thinking about it by weather event or climate event and developing those brief summaries. So yeah, great suggestion. I think for stormwater, I believe it was originally under water resources and sewer. But I think the public works staff felt that a lot of the impacts that stormwater would experience, as well as potential actions to alleviate those impacts, might align more with those taken for natural systems. But definitely open. We have a lot of folks with stormwater experience in this group. So if it just is not making sense in this place, definitely open to suggestions.
I have a question about that.
Thank
Is that partly because we'll want open space, there's places for the water to go?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Yeah, where yes, to allow for that natural flooding to yeah, for those types of examples, yes.
So you're looking at it from a perspective of flooding when you're talking stormwater.
I think that's more where it landed there, but again, if for you all it just doesn't fit there or questions about that, I can definitely.
There's also a factor of pollution control that needs to be in there, which might be more appropriate in the water resources section.
Okay.
Nancy.
This is kind of a strange one, but I think at some point we're gonna have to think about how climate will impact the wild animals that live around us.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, we really think about climate change mostly as with regards to humans, but if you have a wildfire in the area, they will clearly move and will affect the humans. And so I don't know where it fits in your categories, but at some point they'll have to be considered.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
And what would that look like? Just so, do we know what that would look like at all?
I didn't say I didn't. I just know that, they're gonna move.
Yeah.
You know, there's gonna be more, I mean, we see them more and more all the time down in your neighborhoods. They're moving now.
Yeah.
Into our
Yeah, or disease too, I think that's brought up under public health, but
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's a great suggestion. Addition. Any other, any other gaps or things that folks feel like we haven't captured in the sectors or subsectors?
I think there's a nexus between a lot of these
Mhm.
categories that could be made, and it speaks back to kind of what Jamie was talking about. Build a bigger table where you can put events on top. I mean, like I think of a big flood, and if it floods your septic system, that's gonna bring it to the surface, which is now a public health issue. How are you gonna alert the community to stay out of the water?
Yeah.
Great.
Great.
Do you have, can we have?
Yeah, I think that's great. If anything else jumps to mind, later this week, definitely feel free to send those on to me. Great, well, we could move into the next two questions, just seeking additional feedback around if there's any priorities or things that you all want to make sure we spend extra attention on with this list, as well as anything that we should keep in mind as we're starting to think about the actual actions and what is a city or community response for impacts to these areas.
Dan, go ahead.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, I think it's just kind of echoing what maybe came up in our presentation with Lee, but I mean, for me, prioritization is definitely around energy sources. And actually, I'd love to talk to you more. I don't know much about some of those kind of reserve battery approaches through trucks, through solar. Yeah, so that's, I mean, to me, that's fascinating, even though I'm just scratching the surface of my understanding of that. So, so I think that's hugely important here. Well, you know, I think y'all know my bias a little bit, but tree canopy, urban tree canopy, open space, deep paved areas, it just blows me away these last couple of weeks, being in shade, getting off of asphalt, the difference in temperatures. If you're forced to be outside, if it's still technically cooler outside than your apartment that might be 95 or 98 degrees till it's 7 o'clock, it makes a huge, huge difference. So, you know, I guess that's equitable access to green spaces, and even thinking about that at a really micro level too, can be important. I hope this doesn't come off dismissive, but I guess I'm having a little hard time kind of looking at, I'm responding to this in more of those kind of emergency events or weather events we're talking about. I guess I don't necessarily see as much urgency on the kind of long-term community and economic well-being. You mentioned kind of like transitioning into like a wine economy. To me, that's not something that's a huge priority or concern. I mean, as someone who loves outdoor sports, of course, I worry that Snoqualmie Pass might not be a place to ski in the next couple decades, but like to me, that's much lower on my priority list, probably compared to all four of these other sections we have here. So just a couple quick thoughts on that.
Great.
But I'm also not sure I'm interpreting that totally.
Yeah.
Totally, but.
Thank you, Dan. I would echo the energy sources. I do think that that's something, I'm not sure that we can think about the electric grid in the same way that we have in the past.
Yes.
And I really think that that's an area that I know Issaquah doesn't control its own destiny on that, but that's something that I think there needs to be more planning put towards, as well as an understanding of impact. And getting back to my feedback on the previous one, I do think a priority that would help us determine what the priority should be, but for this initial step is identifying what are the highest likelihood events that are increasing in incidence, and where should we be prioritizing based on what science is telling us is going to happen, because that ultimately, I think, obviously we can get a lot of feedback from a bunch of different people, but I would prefer that a lot of our priority is put into what that kind of analysis tells us is important and is going to be changing. That would just be something I hope we do fairly early on to make sure that we're validating what we're working on is actually being put against truly what's going to be changing and the impacts that will come as a result. And I guess, I think that's probably, I think that's kind of my comments.
Great. Any other comments on those.
Question, right?
Yeah, go
What's
ahead.
the time frame that this study's looking at? Is it 10, 20, 50 years?
Yeah, so they'll be looking at 2050 and possibly out to 2080, but more in the shorter term focus. Great. Well, I think I'll move on to the community engagement plan. A lot of the other things that we're going to be looking at are around who and where are we likely to see the biggest impacts. And we did some mapping exercises with staff that we'll also do with the community. That's pretty different from the sectors we were just talking about. So just encourage board members to engage in those community events that we have would be really great. And we'll be coming back to you over the coming months for more input. So as I mentioned, we were really fortunate to receive some funding from Department of Commerce to expand our original scope of the program or the project and add on a number of additional engagement events with the community, as well as expand the number of communication tools we'll be able to develop. So right now, we have a series of different events or products that we're planning to develop to engage the community in this project and really get their input, hear their concerns, their ideas, and needs. We are planning to do an in-person and workshop in September, and then the following week we'll hold a virtual version of that, which will probably be much more condensed. We did a bit of tabling at the resource fair, which fell during the heat wave. I don't know if we'll continue to do the tabling. Wasn't sure, didn't feel like it was quite the right way to engage the community, but that's something we're still kind of weighing and welcome your feedback on that. We're working with our human services team to identify community partners that work with communities that are likely to be at the highest risk for experiencing climate impacts. So those may be folks experiencing homelessness, low income, non-English speaking, folks in affordable housing, those that live in along the creeks in potentially wildfire prone areas. Huge array of potential communities we're identifying where we might, where we are planning to go out and do some focus group sessions or direct surveys with those communities. We are planning also to do a community-wide survey in the fall, similar to what was done for the ICAP, and get input from the entire community. And then our consultant has also proposed developing a project website that would operate sort of as an open house. It would be a place where the community could keep track of the project, provide feedback throughout the project in that space, as opposed to participating in a survey or workshop. So those are some of the initial ideas we have for our engagement plan. Welcome feedback on those, or if you all have other ideas or events that we need to make sure we go out and do, or communities we should be reaching.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I know it's difficult to reach the public, and so I was just wondering if you thought about teaming up with like REI and PCC. They have classes, so maybe team up with them to give presentations. And that would not only educate the people that come to the classes, but they would be advertising it, and so other people would see that, and you could have like links to the city websites. And then maybe from a different avenue, working with the, and I think Microsoft also is another company that brings people in to give presentations. And then another avenue might be to work with the companies to give presentations to their employees. Like, I guess that's what Microsoft would be. But PCC and REI and maybe some other companies, they project it out to the general public. Of course, I don't know, if the people would be, if you're just targeting people who live in Issaquah or also people who work in Issaquah?
Yeah, I think both, because those coming here to work, they potentially are vulnerable to the climate impact if it happens during that time, or it could affect their ability to come to work. So,
So
yeah,
I guess either
Yeah.
would work.
great suggestions. Yeah, it's definitely not an avenue that we had considered, so hoping that.
Might be easier. Tabling.
Thank you, Ann. Nancy?
There is one event that comes up in October that is kind of the big one in town. And you probably won't get the vulnerable populations there, but you'll see a large part of the city, plus all the other cities around to show up, and that would be Salmon Days.
Yeah.
So, there's an opportunity to actually engage people in a meaningful way there, that you wouldn't normally see, because we're all hanging out down there, so anyway.
Yeah.
Just a suggestion.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Nancy. My comment on this is less about the how we engage or like the methods we engage, and more so like the approach. I would just hope that we help people understand implications, like what will this look like, as opposed to just what has happened and what they have seen in their experiences in the past, but helping them see what this potential future could look like for them and almost providing scenarios of how they might react to help identify priorities. I just think that we are beginning to experience the impacts, but we are not experiencing what we will see. And so I just think that that part of the process is important to make sure that we're not just getting this moment in time, but helping people see future impacts and how they would react in that situation, so that you're getting, since we are planning into the future, that lens as well, as we engage with whoever and however we engage, but that approach might help us get them thinking a little further out in their feedback. Great.
Other suggestions? Great. Well, thank you very much for the feedback. I will definitely take that back to the team to incorporate into our plan. So just as a reminder, we're working on that vulnerability assessment right now. They'll be digging further into those sectors. I'll bring forward the suggestion of also looking at it by kind of impact or weather event. And then we'll be starting to roll out that community engagement plan over the coming weeks. Do look out for our community workshops will be coming up in early September, and we'll start planning for any events that we might attend. Great. Yeah, that's it on that.
Jamie, Ann has something.
Oh, sorry, Anna, I missed you. Go ahead.
That's all right. So, I think this is a section in the climate challenge, the Issaquah Climate Challenge, right? So I'm just wondering if we are all supporting that by signing up and sharing it with our networks.
Yeah, thank you. So the Climate Action Challenge, it does have a section on resilience and opportunities you can take with your own household, but then it also talks, I can't remember if it was Nancy or you brought up earlier about kind of neighborhood cohesion during emergency events. So yes, if you are participating in the challenge, that is an area you can go look at to see what actions to take. And if you're not yet participating, I encourage folks to do that. I can send out information again about the Climate Action Challenge. And we do have, I was going to mention in a few minutes, we have someone on board that's going to be doing a lot more outreach and engagement around that, hopefully participating at Salmon Days and some other events coming up in the fall to further engage the community.
Yeah, I did it and I thought I was already doing everything, but there was a bunch more stuff I was able to lower my emissions with. And save water.
Thank you.
All right, well, I think with that, we are through our main agenda items, and we will move on to reports, which Stacey, I think you'll be doing as well.
Sure. Great. Yes, I was just gonna talk briefly about the updated board schedule, and then I also sent out the Title 18 schedule, and then go through some ICAP updates, implementation updates. So just very quickly, the environmental board schedule, towards the back of the packet, just a note, we've had to shift some things around just based on staff availability and readiness of planning processes. We did add a couple of new topics based on interest, including we're hoping in October to talk about the CIP, both an overview, but then also an opportunity for the board to provide input on environmental criteria for the capital improvement plan. And then at our next meeting, that was bumped out from what was originally scheduled this week, is we will be doing the neighborhood meeting checklist review. The planning team is taking the input from last summer as well as our discussion in the spring and working on packaging that information from the board. I did want to note that Lucy Solomon, I think some of you know, left the city back in the spring. So we have some staff trying to step in and compile all that information and really bring the right level that we think the board was interested in. I think it'll be a bit of a trial this year again and transition to see if we get that right. So we'll really be looking for the board's feedback during that meeting. Any questions that you all had on the schedule since it has shifted around a little bit? Yes.
We talked last time about potentially getting parks back.
Parks back. Yes, I will follow up with them and see where we could fit that in. So, thank you. All right. Other questions on the schedule?
Just for that next meeting, is that mostly just plan readiness that the shifts are like the wastewater, for example, and
Oh, that is, yes, that shifted out to October. Yeah, I think because of their required timing and then just where it was. Yeah. Great. And then also included in the packet was the latest Title 18 schedule. That's from what has been presented to the Planning Policy Commission. They are planning to come to the board in November with the compiled land use code update. They will, they've committed to, the staff have committed to sending it 2 weeks in advance for review. Comments will come ahead of the PPC deliberation and then will be considered as part of the council review, which I believe is in early December, is currently scheduled for early December. So do plan to take some time in early November and look at Title 18 and prepare to bring your comments and recommendations. We'll, I'll strategize with Jamie and Dawn ahead of time on how we can very quickly package those comments and make sure that they are passed along to PPC, council, and staff. Any questions on the Title 18 schedule?
has there been any updates in their targeted timing for the process kind of?
I have heard that it is going to council in December, but was still hearing kind of final approval in early 2023. But the latest I have is what was provided to PPC. Great. And then I just wanted to flag, I sent out an announcement for the September 16th event. This is a joint welcoming event between multiple cities. It's an in-person event held in Redmond with a speaker on planning for a just, sustainable, inclusive community. So economic development manager wanted to make sure that invitation was extended to the board and folks are free. Encourage you all to come. I believe it's a free lunch also. But the speaker and topic look really interesting.
So if there's more than so many of us, don't you have to notice
Yes,
those?
great point. Yeah, so thank you. That was not in the email. Yes, I can talk with the clerk. So if folks are planning to come, do let me know and then I'll talk with the clerk. Since it is a outside event, there may be some exceptions, but I'll just let me know if you are planning to attend to that and I'll flag that for them, see if they have concerns. Thanks, Nancy.
How many are allowed, 4 or 5?
let's see, we have a quorum. I think we have to have 5 or under, or sorry, 4 or under to not meet quorum. So, but I'll talk with the clerks because the invitation did go out to multiple boards and commissions to join. So let me check with them and see if there's any concerns if we have more than that. Great. All right, and then I had a number of ICAP implementation updates. If there aren't any further questions on schedule. Okay, well, heat pump campaign and funding for low-income installations. So our heat pump campaign officially launched in late July with the first workshop, public workshop was held then. I think Jamie participated. There were a few things that they worked on improving since that one, and there's actually one that probably just included a couple minutes ago. So hopefully that one was a bit more successful and kind of worked out some of the issues on the first one. We have had pretty good participation from Issaquah on the first 2 workshops, or at least those were registered, but we're really still trying to build up outreach and interest. So any ideas, connections you all have to get the word out more about the heat pump campaign, greatly appreciate those ideas. We did table at the farmers market last weekend. We'll be back out there at the end of the month, but mostly with folks from Sammamish that I was talking to, less so from Issaquah. And right now we just have workshops scheduled through early fall or through mid-September, I believe, but we are looking at ways to hold more workshops later on in the fall. Back in July, council did approve $125,000 that will be used for low-income installations of heat pumps. We're currently evaluating the Imagine housing properties. We've identified the property in Issaquah we're going to be looking at, but there are some other opportunities that may cover partial or full cost of heat pump installs that we're looking into. So there's a way that we might be able to expand our money further to support more low-income installs. And we're also looking at some different grants to really build that arm of the program. Our Clean Buildings program, council did approve $100,000 for our Clean Buildings pilot program, which would support buildings in energy efficiency. There were some reservations from some council members regarding the approach and that we would be working with building owners that were already required to comply with the state law. We've reshaped the program a bit so that it is really focused on existing building energy efficiency and decarbonization. So working with buildings that do need to comply with the state law, but also opening it up to any building owner that's interested in improving their energy efficiency or developing a decarbonization pathway for their building. Council did identify some specific priorities of buildings that we should be working with, such as nonprofits, those that might be financially burdened to comply with the state law, and others. So we are currently working with McDonald Miller, who was selected through our RFP process to scope out the work. We'll have regular reports on progress, challenges, success, hopefully, of that program, and we'll be, I can share that with you all as we report to council. And then,
Stacy, question on that.
Yeah.
Because I don't recall there being a specific partner in the plan before. Is that another update, or am I misremembering?
Yeah, we were going through the RFP process as it was coming to council, just so we had someone on board. But right now we're working to shape that scope of work to reflect the input from council and direction from council. The great opportunity with McDonald Miller is they have been running a program in Bellevue, so it'll be fairly quick to adapt it for Issaquah. But also kind of take the lessons that they've learned in Bellevue and make sure we modify the program to meet our needs and build from any challenges that they have there. All right, Community Climate Challenge, I mentioned briefly, there is someone now that has been hired to work across the participating cities with that program that is really going to hone in on additional recruitment as well as retention for where we've brought on team leaders, making sure they continue to stay engaged, they have tools they need to engage their teams and communities. So I've been talking with her about a couple big outreach events such as Salmon Days, and then the Fish Hatchery is also hosting a large event on September 17th. So we're looking at ways to really tie in salmon and climate change and develop some fun interactive tools and engagement events around that so she can do some more recruitment. Any other ideas you all have on ways we can get out the word on that program, greatly appreciate those as well. Just a couple more updates. Lead for Cities program, I believe I've touched on that in a little bit. We are continuing to work on collecting data to for the criteria associated with receiving a certification as a lead city. We are starting to make better progress on that data collection. And it's also beginning to identify maybe some gaps that we have in the city where we could either implement policies or just some different practices. So far it's been very beneficial both in seeing where we are and where we might need to make some improvements. We're looking at probably aiming for gold, but we'll see kind of where our data collection ends us up and which criteria we'll be able to apply for. Then last update is just on EV charging. So today I was out with Puget Sound Solar and ChargePoint, who will be putting in some city-sponsored EV charging stations and replacing some old ones. We are looking at, those would be just a couple to start with, but then we're looking at doing more, possibly some crowdsourcing with the community to get input on where the next set of chargers would go. And really, part of my interest is starting to look at multifamily housing or affordable housing, places that might not have access in a garage, for example. So more to come on that as we look at building that program and identifying those future sites. Right, and I think I will pause there with any questions that we have on the ICAP implementation. Yeah.
I might just want to say the same thing with the businesses about the climate challenge. Just
Yes.
kind of see if we can get the local businesses involved.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that has been on my list for quite a while, working with our economic development manager to have her set up those connections with REI and Sanmar and Microsoft and others. So I will put that to the top because I think that's a great opportunity to do that outreach.
Microsoft. And I've tried to approach PCC on some different things, but I think if it's coming from you or somebody, you know, from the city, it would be more effective.
Okay.
Great. Well, I think any other business or items from the rest of the board? Stacey, anything for you?
Nothing else for me.
All right. Well, with that, we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Great meeting. Thanks, everybody.